Everyone read it wrong. Good job, Annie, the billionaire said quietly, his voice calm but clear. You recognized the secret letters, didn't you? Come here. Come here now. Annie hesitated for just a moment, then walked slowly toward the long table. Victoria Carter sat very straight in her chair, her fingers lightly touching the edge of a leather folder. She did not look angry, but there was a sharpness in her eyes. William, she said in a calm, controlled voice, this is a family meeting. We're discussing the estate, the company, voting shares, the future of the board. Annie shouldn't be part of this conversation. She's a child. She can't just walk in here and tell a room full of adults that everyone is reading something wrong. Daniel, her son, nodded. I'm sure she didn't mean it the way it sounded, he added, in a tone that sounded polite but dismissive at the same time. But this book has been examined for years. Experts, code specialists, people from universities. If they couldn't read it, it's hard to believe that Annie can just look at it and say we're all wrong. Annie stood beside the table, looking at the strange symbols on the open page. I didn't say I'm smarter, Annie said softly. I just said you're reading it wrong. I've seen these secret signs before. That made a few people in the room shift in their chairs. Victoria tilted her head slightly. You've seen them before? She asked. Where would you have seen something like this? Annie pointed at one of the symbols on the page, a small curved mark with a line through it. This one, she said, is not a letter. It's a reminder. It means the real word is somewhere else. She looked around the table, then added, my mom uses this when she writes letters. She says it means, don't read this part. It's hiding something. Claire, standing near the wall, felt the blood drain from her face. Daniel gave a small, skeptical smile. So you're saying this whole room full of people, lawyers, analysts, code experts are wrong, and you're right because your mother writes secret notes? Annie shook her head quickly. No. I'm saying you're reading it like a normal book. But it's not a normal book. Look. She leaned forward and pointed again, this time to a group of symbols near the middle of the page. See these? They look like letters, but they're too far apart. That means you don't read them together. You jump. From here, to here, then here. She traced an invisible path across the page with her finger, skipping lines, moving diagonally. A few people leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. This is how you read secret letters, Annie said, not straight. You read them the way the person who wrote them wanted you to find them. Victoria watched her for a long moment, then slowly closed her folder. All right, she said calmly. If Annie is so sure that everyone in this room is reading it wrong, then perhaps Annie should read it for us. That would be the easiest way to prove it, wouldn't it? She turned slightly toward the others at the table. We have the family council here. We have the company lawyer. We have witnesses. If Annie believes she understands the book better than the experts, then we should all listen carefully. Her tone was polite, almost kind, but there was a quiet challenge inside her words. Daniel nodded. That sounds fair to me, he said. Go ahead, Annie. Read it. Show us how everyone is wrong. And you're right. The room grew very quiet. William did not speak. He simply reached out and turned the book, so it faced Annie completely. Then he slid it a few inches closer to her. Go on, he said gently. Annie looked down at the page. Up close, the symbols looked even stranger, like little drawings pretending to be letters. She did not touch the paper. She just looked, the way her mother had taught her look first, read later. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Annie pointed to a symbol near the top corner. This is where you start, she said. The lawyer frowned. That's not the first line. I know, Annie said. It's not supposed to look like the first line. That's why everyone missed it. She took a small breath, then began to read slowly, carefully, as if she were listening to the page instead of just looking at it. To the one person who knows the secret alphabet. She read softly. The lawyer's pen stopped moving. Daniel's smile faded. Claire closed her eyes. Annie continued, her voice small but clear in the silent room. If you are reading this, it means you learned how to read the letters that were never meant for the world, only for our family. Annie looked up from the page and around the room. Annie did not seem nervous anymore. Once she started reading, the symbols stopped looking strange and started looking familiar, like something she had known for a long time but was only now allowed to say out loud. She held the book with both hands, standing beside the long table, and began reading again. this time more smoothly, almost as if she were reading a story instead of a code. It says, "This is not a business ledger. It is not a record of money, shares, or company accounts. This is a record of the truth I could not tell anyone while I was building my company." The company lawyer slowly removed his glasses. "A record of the truth?" he repeated quietly. Annie nodded and continued reading. It says, "I wrote this in a secret alphabet because there are people in this house I could not trust with the truth. So I hid it in plain sight. Inside a book everyone could see, but no one could read." Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the back of her chair, but she still did not interrupt. Annie turned the page and kept reading, her voice steady. It says, "My wife was not faithful to me. She had a relationship with a man who worked for me. A man I trusted. My assistant. The man who stood in my office every day and called me his friend." Daniel's chair moved suddenly against the floor. "This is inappropriate," he said. "This is a private matter, and we don't even know if that's what the book really says." Annie looked up at him and pointed at the page. "It's right here," she said simply. Then she continued reading. It says, "The boy she brought into this house was not my son. He was hers and that man's child. I knew from the beginning, but I said nothing, because at the time I was still building everything, and a scandal would have destroyed the company and everyone who depended on it." No one in the room spoke. Annie kept reading. It says, "I lived many years in the same house with a lie at my dinner table. I told myself I was protecting the company, protecting the employees, protecting the future. But the truth was, I was also protecting myself. It is a heavy thing for a man to admit he built an empire but could not control his own home." If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. Victoria finally spoke, but her voice was very quiet now. "William, you don't have to do this." William did not answer her. He was looking at Annie, and there was no surprise in his face, only a kind of tired acceptance. Annie turned another page. It says, "This book was never meant to be a will. It was never meant to be an inheritance ledger. It was a test. A test to see who in this house could read the truth when it was hidden, and who would only see what they wanted to see." Mr. Reynolds looked at William again. "So the inheritance condition," he began. Annie read the next line before he could finish. It says, "Today I brought this book out again because I know my wife and her son are waiting for me to die so they can take control of everything. They believe this book is a financial ledger. They believe whoever reads it controls the company. So I let them believe that, because the person who can truly read this book will be the only person I can trust with what I built." Daniel shook his head slowly. No, this is not happening like this. We are not going to let a child reinterpret a document that decides control of a corporation." Annie looked at him, then at everyone in the room. She closed the book gently, her small hand resting on the cover. "You're all reading it wrong," she said again, but this time her voice was clearer, more certain. "This isn't an inheritance book. It's his secret story. He wrote everything he couldn't say out loud. That's why the letters are hidden. That's why the words are not in order. It's not numbers or accounts. It's the truth." The room went completely still. Annie looked at William and then back at the others. He said, "The person who can read the truth in this book is the person he trusts. That's why the person who reads it gets everything. Not because it's a will, but because it's a test." No one spoke. No one moved. The silence in the room felt heavier than any argument. William Carter finally stepped forward and placed his hand on the book Annie was holding. "She's right," he said quietly. He looked around the table at the lawyer, the board members, his wife, and Daniel. "This was never a ledger," William said. "It was a record, a confession, and a test." Then he looked down at Annie, his voice softer when he spoke again. "And Annie is the only one in this room who read it correctly." William Carter did not raise his voice, yet somehow the entire room felt as if he had just struck the table with his fist. "She's right," he had said. "This was never a ledger. It was a record, a confession, and a test. And Annie is the only one in this room who read it correctly." No one spoke immediately after that. The kind of silence that followed was not polite silence. It was the silence of people quickly rethinking everything they believed was about to happen. Daniel was the first to recover. He let out a short breath, and gave a small, disbelieving laugh. "So that's it?" he said. "That's how this is going to go? A story in a secret code, read by a 6-year-old, and suddenly she controls the future of Carter Industries?" William did not look at him. "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said," Daniel replied, still trying to keep his voice calm. "You said the person who reads the book gets everything. That's what the will says. That's why we're all here." Mr. Reynolds, the lawyer, cleared his throat carefully. "Technically," he said, choosing his words like someone walking across thin ice, "the inheritance clause does state that control of Mr. Carter's personal shares and voting authority will transfer to the individual who successfully deciphers the contents of the journal and presents its meaning before witnesses." He paused, then added, "Which Annie has just done." Victoria slowly sat down again. She did not look at Annie. She looked only at William. "You planned this," she said quietly. "All these years. You planned this." William finally met her eyes. "Yes," he said. The honesty of the answer seemed to hit the room harder than if he had shouted. Victoria's voice remained controlled, but there was something fragile under the surface now. "You let us believe that book was a financial record. You let lawyers, analysts, and board members spend years trying to decode it. You let my son believe his future depended on it." William's expression did not change. "I let everyone believe exactly what they wanted to believe," he said. "That was part of the test." Daniel leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "A test of what?" "Of who in this house looks at a page and only sees money," William replied. "And who looks at a page and tries to understand the person who wrote it." The words settled heavily over the table. Mr. Reynolds spoke again, more quietly now. "Mr. Carter, for the sake of clarity, are you saying that the inheritance condition was never about financial intelligence or business knowledge, but about understanding the personal contents of the journal?" "Yes," William said, "because numbers can be taught, business can be taught, but trust—" He shook his head slightly. "Trust is something else." Across the room, Claire still had not moved. She stood near the wall, one hand covering her mouth, tears quietly running down her face. She was not crying loudly. She was crying the way people cry when something they have carried for years finally becomes too heavy to hold anymore. Annie looked around the room, confused by the tension she could feel but did not fully understand. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked quietly. William turned to her immediately. "No," he said, his voice softer than it had been the entire meeting. "You did exactly right." Daniel pushed his chair back and stood up, walking a few steps away from the table before turning back. "I don't accept this," he said. "I don't accept that the future of a corporation is being decided like this, with a story and a code and a child reading secrets out loud. This corporation," William said calmly, "exists because I made decisions that other people said were unreasonable, impossible, illogical. I'm comfortable with unreasonable." "That's not the point," Daniel replied. "The point is that this changes everything. If the book isn't a ledger, and if the test is just who can read your secret letters, then the entire structure of the will is built around something personal, not something professional." "Of course it is," William said. "It's my will." No one had an answer to that. Mr. Reynolds opened the folder in front of him and reviewed several pages, his finger moving slowly down the text. "The clause is very specific," he said. "It does not say the person must be a family member by marriage. It does not say the person must be an executive. It only says the person who correctly interprets the journal in front of witnesses will inherit controlling interest in Mr. Carter's personal shares." He looked up at Annie, then back at William. "Legally speaking, the language is clear." Victoria's voice came out very quietly. "She's a child." William nodded once. "She can't run a company," Victoria said. "She won't have to," William replied. "Not now." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," William said, "that control and management are two different things. The board runs the company. Executives run the company. Owners decide who they trust to run it." He rested his hand lightly on the back of Annie's chair. "This meeting was never about who is the best businessman," William said. "It was about who I trust with what I built, and I trust the person who read the truth, not the people who spent 5 years looking for numbers that were never there." Annie looked up at him. "I don't want your company," she said honestly. "I just read the book." A few people in the room exchanged glances. The simplicity of her answer made the entire situation feel even more surreal. William gave a small, tired smile. "I know," he said. "That's part of why you're the right person." Mr. Reynolds closed the folder slowly. "We will need to begin the legal transfer process," he said. "There will be paperwork, trustees, a guardianship structure until Annie is 18. This will be complicated." Victoria let out a quiet breath and looked down at the table. "All these years," she said softly, almost to herself. "All these years I thought that book was about money." William looked at her, and for the first time there was no anger in his voice, only something like regret. "It was never about money," he said. "It was about the truth. And the truth is the only thing in this house no one ever wanted to read." The clock in the corner began to chime the hour, each deep note echoing through the room. Annie looked at the book in her hands, then back at William. "Is the story finished?" she asked. William looked at the book for a long moment before answering. "No," he said quietly. "We've only read the part I wrote. The rest is what happens after the truth comes out." The grandfather clock had just finished striking when no one in the room seemed to know what to do next. For years, this meeting had existed in everyone's mind as a future event, the day the will would be read, the day control would be decided, the day everything would become clear. But no one had imagined it would happen like this, with a 6-year-old girl holding a book that had defeated experts, lawyers, and analysts. Mr. Reynolds was the first to return to procedure, because procedure was the only thing in the room that still made sense. "We need to document what just happened," he said, opening his folder again. "This meeting is now an official witness event. The journal has been interpreted aloud in front of the family and the board. According to the inheritance clause, that fulfills the conditions set by Mr. Purpose, Bronzero, I, Carter." Daniel let out a quiet, disbelieving breath. "You're talking like this is already decided." "I'm talking like a lawyer," Mr. Reynolds replied calmly. "And legally, this is very close to decided." Victoria finally looked at Annie directly, for the first time since the reading began. Her expression was not cruel, not angry, it was something more complicated than that. It was the look of someone watching the future rearrange itself in a way she had never prepared for. "Annie," she said gently, "do you understand what everyone is saying? Do you understand what this means?" Annie shook her head honestly. "Not really," she said. "I just read the book because everyone was reading it wrong." A few people at the table shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with how simple she made something that felt so enormous to them. Victoria folded her hands together. "This company," she said carefully, "is not just money. It's factories, employees, investors, retirement funds, charities, scholarships. Thousands of people depend on the decisions made in this room. That's why this meeting matters so much." Annie listened politely, but her answer was still the answer of a child. "I don't want to take anything from anyone," she said. "I just read what it said." William spoke then, his voice calm and steady. "And that," he said, "is exactly why I trust her." Daniel shook his head and walked to the window, looking out over the long lawn behind the house. "You trust her," he said. "But what does that mean in reality? She's 6. She can't vote in board meetings. She can't run a company. She can't even sign a legal document." "She doesn't need to," William replied. "Not now. The structure is simple. The shares go to Annie. The board continues to operate. The company continues to run. But the ownership, the final authority, belongs to the person who passed the test." Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "A trust can be established," he said. "A legal guardian will manage the shares on Annie's behalf until she reaches legal age. The board will continue to manage daily operations. From a legal standpoint, it is entirely possible." Daniel turned back from the window. "So that's it? Years of work? Years of being told that this book would decide everything. And in the end, the decision was made before any of us even walked into this room?" William did not deny it. "Yes," he said. Victoria looked at him for a long time. "You never intended for anyone else to win this," she said quietly. "I intended," William replied, "for the right person to win it. And you decided who the right person was years ago," she said. William did not answer directly. Instead, he walked slowly to the head of the table and rested his hand on the back of his chair. "5 years ago," he said. I started bringing this book to meetings. I told everyone it contained financial information, account structures, ownership maps. I let people believe that whoever decoded it would prove they were smart enough to control the company. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. But that was never the real test, he said. The real test was simple. Who would try to understand the man who wrote the book, and who would only try to control what the book could give them. The words were not loud, but they landed heavily. Claire was still standing near the wall, tears drying on her face now, replaced by something else, fear, yes, but also something like relief. The kind of relief that comes when a secret you carried alone is no longer yours to carry. Annie looked up at William again. "Are you in trouble?" she asked quietly. Because everyone looks upset. A few people at the table looked down at their hands, embarrassed by how clearly a child could see the room. William shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I'm not in trouble." "Are they in trouble?" Annie asked, glancing toward Victoria and Daniel. William followed her gaze, then looked back at Annie. "No," he said again. "This isn't about punishing anyone." He paused, then added, "It's about telling the truth before it's too late to tell it." Mr. Reynolds closed the folder again and exhaled slowly. "Then the next step," he said, "is to formally state, for the record, that Annie is the individual who successfully interpreted the journal." He looked at William. "Mr. Carter, do you confirm that Annie was the intended reader of the journal?" William did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. "And do you confirm," the lawyer continued, "that according to the inheritance clause, your controlling shares, properties listed under your personal holdings, and voting authority will be transferred into a trust under Annie's name?" "Yes," William said again. Mr. Reynolds nodded and wrote something down. "Then we will begin the legal process immediately." The room was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. Not shock. Not confusion. Something more final than that. Daniel walked back to the table slowly and looked at Annie for a long moment. His expression was difficult to read now, not anger, not kindness, but something like the moment a person realizes the world is not shaped the way they thought it was. "You know," he said to her, not unkindly, "most people spend their whole lives trying to get into rooms like this." Annie thought about that very seriously, then said, "I was just looking for my mom." No one in the room had an answer to that. William pulled out his chair and sat down again. But this time he did not sit at the head of the table like a man in charge. He sat beside Annie. "For years," he said quietly, mostly to the room but partly to himself, "everyone in this house walked past the truth every day and never saw it, not because it was hidden well, but because they never thought to look for it in a child's hands." He looked at Annie and gave a small, tired smile. "The funny thing about the truth," he said, "is that it doesn't care who is rich, who is powerful, or who sits at the big table. It only cares who is willing to read it." William did not end the meeting immediately. Even after the lawyer closed his folder and the legal words had been spoken out loud, no one stood up. No one reached for their phone. It was as if everyone understood that something larger than a business decision had just happened, and walking out too quickly would feel like pretending it hadn't. Annie was still standing beside the table, the heavy book in front of her. Now that she was no longer reading, she looked small again, just a little girl in a room built for adults with important voices and expensive opinions. She looked up at William. "Can I go find my mom now?" she asked. A few people lowered their eyes. The question was so normal, so far away from shares and control and inheritance, that it made the entire meeting feel strange. William nodded. "Yes," he said. "You can go with your mother." Claire stepped forward immediately, as if she had been waiting for permission to breathe. She placed a gentle hand on Annie's shoulder. "Say thank you," she whispered softly. "Thank you," Annie said politely, looking at the lawyer, then at the people around the table, not really knowing what she was thanking them for. As Claire began to guide Annie toward the door, William spoke again. "Annie." She turned around. "Take the book with you," he said. The entire room looked up at that. "Mr. Reynolds frowned slightly. "Mr. Carter, that document is now part of a legal process. It should probably remain. It belongs to her," William said calmly. "It always did." Annie picked up the book with both arms. It was heavier than it looked. She held it against her chest, the way children hold school books. Then she left the room with her mother, the door closing softly behind them. The moment the door shut, the atmosphere in the room changed. The conversation that followed was no longer something a child needed to hear. Daniel spoke first. "You understand this is going to be a war," he said. William did not pretend to misunderstand him. Yes, he said. Victoria sat very still, her hands folded together on the table. You didn't just change your will today, she said quietly. You changed the balance of power in this family, in the company, and on the board. Do you know what investors are going to say when they find out that controlling shares were transferred to a 6-year-old? They'll say, William replied, that the shares are in a trust managed by professionals, which is done every day in this country. That's not what they'll really say, Daniel replied. They'll say you lost your mind. William almost smiled. People have been saying that since I started the company. Mr. Reynolds closed his folder and leaned back in his chair. The public explanation will be important, he said. We don't have to disclose the contents of the journal. Legally, we can simply state that the inheritance condition was fulfilled and the shares were transferred into a trust as previously outlined. Victoria looked at the lawyer. And when the board asks why Annie, she said, what do we tell them? That she solved a puzzle no one else could solve? Mr. Reynolds hesitated. We tell them the truth, he said carefully. That Mr. Carter designed a private condition for inheritance, and that condition has been met. Daniel shook his head. You're all talking about this like it's just paperwork, but this changes everything. Whoever controls those shares controls the board. Whoever controls the board controls the company. That means every major decision, every merger, every expansion, every sale, all of it now goes through a trust controlled by lawyers on behalf of a child. William looked at him. Yes. Daniel held his gaze. And you're comfortable with that? I'm comfortable knowing it's not in the wrong hands, William said. The words were calm, but they were heavy. Victoria looked down at the table for a long moment before speaking again. You kept this secret for years, she said. You lived in the same house with us, had dinner with us, went to events, took photographs, held board meetings, and all that time you knew that one day everything would go to her. William did not try to defend himself. Yes, he said again. Victoria nodded slowly, absorbing that. So this was decided a long time ago. Yes, and nothing anyone did in this room today could have changed it. William thought about that for a moment. Actually, he said, that's not true. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? William folded his hands on the table. If someone else had figured out how to read the book, truly read it, not decode it like a machine, but understand why it was written, then I would have known that person understood me, understood what I built, understood what this company cost. He looked from Daniel to Victoria. But none of you tried to understand the book, he said. You all tried to defeat it. No one answered that. Outside the conference room, down the long hallway and past the back staircase, Annie sat with Claire in the small staff kitchen. The room smelled like coffee and toast, and the afternoon light came through a small window over the sink. Annie placed the heavy book on the table and pushed it toward her mother. It was just letters, she said. Why were they so upset? Claire sat down slowly across from her. For a moment, she didn't answer. She just looked at the book, then at her daughter. Because, Claire said quietly, sometimes letters change people's lives. Annie thought about that. Did I change something? She asked. Claire reached across the table and brushed a curl away from Annie's face. Her hand trembled slightly. Yes, she said. You did. Annie looked down at the book again. Is he in trouble? She asked. Mr. William? Claire's eyes filled again. But this time she didn't look away. No, she said softly. He's been in trouble for a very long time. You just helped him tell the truth. Annie nodded, as if that made sense. In the big conference room at the other end of the house, William Carter stood by the window, looking out over the long driveway where he had built his life from nothing. Behind him, lawyers and family were still discussing structures, trusts, announcements, and board reactions. But for the first time in many years, William was no longer thinking about the company. He was thinking about a little girl carrying a book down a hallway, holding it against her chest like it belonged to her. Because it did. That night, the house felt different. The Carter estate had always been quiet in the evenings. But it was the comfortable quiet of wealth, the hum of distant air conditioning, the soft glow of lamps, the faint clink of dishes being cleared somewhere far away. But tonight the quiet felt watchful, like the house itself knew something had changed. In the small staff kitchen, Claire stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup that neither of them were really hungry for. Annie sat at the table with the big book in front of her, her legs swinging slowly under the chair, her fingers tracing the strange symbols on the cover. Don't touch it too much, Claire said gently. It's old. I'm not going to break it, Annie said. I'm just looking. Claire turned off the stove and sat across from her. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just watched her daughter looking at the book, his book, their book. Annie, she said quietly, you must not tell anyone about the letters your father and I used. Do you understand? Annie looked up. But everyone already knows now, she said. They saw me read it. They know you can read it, Claire said. They don't know why you can read it. Annie thought about that. Because you taught me, she said. Claire nodded slowly. Yes. And I taught you because, a long time ago, someone taught me, and we never thought. She stopped herself and looked down at her hands. We never thought it would happen like this. Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question she had been holding in her head since the meeting. Why did he write all those sad things? She asked. In the book. About being alone in his own house. Claire's eyes filled again, but she did not look away this time. Because sometimes adults make choices that look right on the outside, she said softly, but feel very wrong on the inside. And then they have to live with those choices for a very long time. Annie nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but understanding enough. Is he still in trouble? She asked again. Claire shook her head. No, she said. But things are going to change now. For him. For us. For everyone in this house. At that same moment, in the main part of the house, William sat alone in his study. The lights were low, and the large windows reflected his own image back at him, a man in an expensive chair, in an expensive house, who looked more tired than successful. On his desk were two photographs. One was a formal photo taken years ago. William, Victoria, and Daniel standing in front of a holiday tree, all dressed perfectly, all smiling the kind of smile people use when photographers are watching. The other photograph was small, printed on regular paper, slightly bent at the corners. In it, a little girl with dark curls was sitting on the grass in the far corner of the estate garden, holding a book upside down, laughing at something outside the frame. William picked up the second photo and looked at it for a long time. There was a quiet knock on the door. Come in, he said. Mr. Reynolds stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He was no longer holding folders or legal documents. Now he looked more like an old friend than a company lawyer. It's done, he said. The preliminary paperwork is in motion. By the end of the week, the trust will be established. Annie will legally hold controlling shares through the trust. William nodded once. Thank you. Mr. Reynolds hesitated, then said, I've worked with you for 20 years, William. I've seen you negotiate with people twice your size, buy companies everyone said were impossible to buy, and build this entire empire from a 2-room office. But I have to admit, I never saw this coming. William gave a small, tired smile. That was the idea. The lawyer studied him for a moment. You're not doing this because of the company, he said. You're doing this because of her. William did not pretend otherwise. Yes. Mr. Reynolds walked a little closer to the desk. You understand what this will cost you, he said quietly. Your reputation will take a hit. The board will question you. Victoria will not accept this quietly. There will be lawyers. There may be court challenges. The press will eventually find out. William leaned back in his chair. I know, and you're doing it anyway. William looked down at the photo of Annie again. I built this company so that one day I could make my own decisions, he said. If I can't use it to protect my own child, then what was the point of building it? Mr. Reynolds did not have an answer for that. After a long moment, the lawyer said, She doesn't know yet, does she? No, William said, and I don't know how to tell her. Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. In my experience, he said, the truth is usually simpler than the secrets we build around it. William let out a quiet breath. I've had 6 years to tell her the truth, he said. And I never did. Then maybe, the lawyer said gently. You should start with something simple. William looked up. Like what? Mr. Reynolds gave a small shrug. Like I'm your father. The words hung in the room. William looked back down at the photograph in his hand, at the little girl laughing in the sun, not knowing that the world had just shifted under her feet. In the staff kitchen, Annie had fallen asleep at the table, her head resting on her folded arms beside the big book. Claire lifted her gently and carried her down the hallway to their small room in the staff wing. She laid Annie on the bed and pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. Annie stirred slightly but did not wake. Claire sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her daughter for a long time. Everything is going to change now, she whispered softly. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a hard thing? Maybe both. She brushed Annie's hair back gently. But no matter what happens, she said, her voice barely more than a breath, you will never be a secret again. Down the hall, in a much larger bedroom, William Carter stood alone in the dark, looking out the window toward the small lights in the staff quarters. For years, that distance from the big house to the small rooms had been a distance he believed he had to accept. Tonight, for the first time, he realized that distance was something he had chosen, and now he had chosen to end it. The next morning, the Carter estate woke up earlier than usual. News had not reached the outside world yet. But inside the house, information moved the way it always does, in large houses with many employees quietly, from one person to another, in short sentences, in careful voices. By the time Annie walked into the kitchen, 2 of the house staff had already heard that something important had happened in the conference room. They didn't know details. They only knew that lawyers had stayed late, that Mr. Carter had not eaten dinner, and that the big book had left the conference room in Annie's arms. Annie climbed onto her usual chair at the small kitchen table. Claire placed a plate in front of her scrambled eggs and toast cut into small squares. Are we in trouble? Annie asked while reaching for a piece of toast. Claire paused for half a second, then sat down across from her. No, she said gently. We're not in trouble. Are we going to have to leave the house? Annie asked. The question was so direct that Claire felt it like a small knife in her chest. Children who grow up in staff quarters understand something very early. This is not your house, even if you grow up in it. I don't know, Claire said honestly. But if we do, we will be okay. Annie nodded, accepting that answer more easily than an adult would have. Then she said, Mr. William looked sad yesterday. Claire looked down at her coffee. Yes, she said quietly. He was. Why? Annie asked. Claire searched for words a 6-year-old could understand. Because sometimes telling the truth is not the same thing as fixing the past, she said. Annie thought about that while chewing her toast. I think he wanted everyone to know, she said. The book felt like when someone hides a birthday present but still wants you to find it. Claire almost laughed, and then almost cried, because that was the most accurate description of the book she had ever heard. Across the estate, in the main house, Victoria Carter was already awake and dressed, sitting in the small morning room with a cup of tea she had not touched. Daniel stood near the window, reading emails on his phone, his jaw tight. They're already scheduling an emergency board call, he said. Someone from legal must have talked. People know something happened. They don't know what, but they know something changed. Victoria did not look surprised. Of course they do, she said. Companies like this don't move quietly. The moment a controlling share shifts, people feel it. Daniel lowered his phone. We're not just going to accept this, he said. There has to be a way to challenge it. She's a minor. She's not the problem, Victoria said calmly. Daniel frowned. Then what is? Victoria finally looked at him. Your stepfather, she said. Your stepfather spent years planning this. This was not a decision he made yesterday. This was a decision he made a long time ago. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Did you know? He asked. Victoria held his gaze for a long time before answering. No, she said. But I should have. In his study, William had not slept much. He was still in the same shirt from the night before, sitting at his desk with a legal pad in front of him. On the pad, he had written the same sentence several times, each time crossing it out. I'm your father. He stared at the sentence for a long time, then crossed it out again. There was a knock on the door, and before he could answer, Claire stepped in. She looked like she hadn't slept much either. I'm sorry to come in without an appointment, she said quietly. But we need to talk. William nodded toward the chair across from his desk. Sit, he said. Claire did not sit right away. Everything is changing now, she said. The staff is already talking. People are asking questions. Annie is asking questions. William nodded slowly. I know. Claire looked at him, and for the first time in years, she did not look at him like an employee speaking to her employer. She looked at him like a woman who had been carrying the same secret as him for a very long time. You should have told her, she said quietly. I know, he said again. She's 6, William, Claire said. She walked into that room because she thought she was helping. She doesn't understand inheritance, or shares, or why your wife looks at her the way she does now. She just knows she read a book and everyone got quiet. William leaned back in his chair, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. I was trying to protect her, he said. Claire shook her head slightly. No, she said softly. You were trying to protect yourself from a conversation you didn't know how to have. The words were not cruel. They were simply true. William looked down at the legal pad again, at the crossed-out sentences. I don't know how to be her father, he admitted quietly. I missed 6 years, 6 birthdays, 6 Christmas mornings. I watched them from a distance like a guest in my own life. Claire's voice softened. Then don't start by being a billionaire, she said. Start by being a man who talks to his daughter. William let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. I negotiate billion-dollar deals without shaking, he said. But I'm afraid to talk to a 6-year-old. That's because she's the only deal in your life that isn't about winning, Claire said. They were both quiet for a moment. Where is she now? William asked. In the garden, Claire said. She took the book and went to sit under the big tree. She said, that's where the book feels like it wants to be. William nodded slowly. Of course she did. Claire walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. William, she said, after today, the whole world is going to know she's important. He looked up at her. So before the world tells her who she is, Claire said gently, you should tell her yourself. After Claire left, William sat alone for a long time. Then he stood up, picked up the small photograph from his desk, the one of Annie in the garden, and walked out of the study. Outside, the morning was cool and bright. At the far end of the lawn, under the large oak tree, Annie sat in the grass with the big book open in her lap, her legs crossed, her head bent over the strange symbols as if they were a normal children's story. William stopped a few steps away from her. For a moment, he did not speak. He just watched her, trying to memorize the way she looked right now. Before the world started calling her by titles and last names and legal terms, Annie looked up and saw him. She smiled, the easy smile of a child who does not yet know how complicated adults can be. Hi, Mr. William, she said. I think the book is sad in the middle but happy at the end. William swallowed, then walked a little closer. Annie, he said quietly, there's something I should have told you a long time ago. William stood under the oak tree for a few seconds before saying anything more. Annie was sitting in the grass with the big book open on her lap, her finger moving slowly over the strange symbols like she was following a map only she could see. You said the book is sad in the middle but happy at the end, William said, sitting down on the grass a short distance from her. Why do you think that? Annie didn't look up right away. She turned one page carefully, then another. Because in the middle he writes like he's alone, she said. Like he's in a big house but nobody knows who he really is. But at the end, the letters look different. They're bigger. Like he's not hiding anymore. William felt that sentence somewhere deep in his chest, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. That's very observant, he said quietly. Annie shrugged a little. It's easier to read when you know who the letters are for, she said. Then she looked up at him. Were they for you? William shook his head slowly. No, he said. They weren't for me. Annie tilted her head. Then who were they for? William looked out across the lawn for a moment. At the long driveway, the gardens, the fountains, all the things he had once believed were the most important things in his life. Then he looked back at Annie. They were for you, he said. Annie blinked. For me? Yes. She frowned a little, trying to understand. But why would a grown man write a whole book for me? I'm just a kid. William smiled sadly. Because sometimes, he said, a man makes a mistake, and he spends many years trying to find a way to fix it. And sometimes the only way to fix it is to tell the truth and hope the person you hurt will forgive you. Annie thought about that very seriously. Did he hurt me? She asked. William took a slow breath. This was the moment he had been avoiding for 6 years, and now it was here, sitting in the grass under a tree with a little girl who trusted him enough to ask simple questions. Yes, he said quietly. I think I did. Annie looked at him for a long moment, then asked the question in the most direct way possible. Are you the man who wrote the book? William nodded. Yes. Annie looked down at the book again, then back at him. Then why didn't you just tell everyone the truth without making a secret alphabet? She asked. William almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because I was a coward, he said, and because I thought I had more time. Annie accepted that answer more easily than most adults would have. She closed the book gently and rested her hands on the cover. "Mr. William," she said, "my mom says when grown-ups keep secrets for too long, the secret starts to get heavy and makes them tired." William nodded slowly. "Your mom is a very wise woman." Annie looked at him carefully, studying his face the way children do when they are trying to solve a puzzle. "You look tired," she said. "I am," he admitted. There was a long, quiet moment between them, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when something important is about to be said, and both people can feel it. "Annie," William said finally, "there's something I should have told you a long time ago." Annie waited. "I'm not just Mr. William," he said. "I'm your father." The word seemed to hang in the air between them. Annie did not react the way adults expect children to react to big news. She did not cry. She did not get angry. She just looked at him, searching his face as if she were checking whether the sentence fit him the way a name fits a person. "You're my dad?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She thought about that for a long time. "So that's why you always came to the garden when I was there," she said. "And why you knew I liked the strawberry ice cream even though I never told you." William nodded, his throat tight. "Yes. And that's why you wrote the book so I could read it," she said. "Yes." Annie looked down at the book again, then back at him. "Did you want me to find out like this?" William shook his head slowly. "No. I wanted to be brave enough to tell you myself. I just waited too long." Annie was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Are you going to live with us now?" The question was so simple that it almost broke his heart. "I live here," he said gently. Annie shook her head. "No, I mean really live with us. Eat in the kitchen sometimes, not just in the big dining room." William felt his eyes sting for the first time in many years. "I would like that," he said quietly. "If that's okay with you." Annie considered this very seriously, like it was a very important business decision. Then she nodded once. "Okay," she said, "but you have to tell me the truth from now on. No more secret alphabets unless it's for fun." William let out a breath that sounded like something inside him had finally been set down after being carried for too many years. "Deal," he said. Annie held out her hand, the way she had seen adults do when they made important agreements. William looked at her small hand for a moment, then shook it gently. "Deal," he repeated. Annie smiled, then opened the book again. "Do you want me to read the happy ending part to you?" she asked. William nodded. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that very much." Annie flipped to the last pages and began to read, her small voice steady in the morning air. "It says, if you are reading this, then it means the truth finally made it out of the house. It says, I hope when you read this, you are not standing in the hallway anymore. I hope you are sitting at the big table. I hope you are not a secret. I hope you have my name, and I hope one day you can forgive me for waiting so long to give it to you." Annie stopped reading and looked up at him. "That's the happy part," she said. "Because at the end, he's not hiding anymore." William nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Under the oak tree, a man who had spent his whole life building an empire sat beside a 6-year-old girl reading him a book he had written, and for the first time in many years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. William did not move for a long time after Annie finished reading the last lines under the oak tree. The morning air was cool, and somewhere in the distance a lawnmower started, the low hum rolling across the wide green lawn like any other ordinary day. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Annie closed the book gently and looked at him. "So now everyone knows," she said. "Yes," William replied. "Are they going to be mad?" she asked. William thought about that question carefully. He had spent his entire adult life understanding people, investors, competitors, partners, politicians, but this question, asked by a 6-year-old girl sitting barefoot in the grass, was somehow harder to answer than any negotiation he had ever faced. "Some of them will be," he said honestly. "Because when the truth changes people's plans, they don't usually say thank you." Annie nodded like that made perfect sense. "My mom says people don't get mad when you lie to them," she said. "They get mad when you stop lying." William let out a quiet breath. "Your mom is right." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Annie asked, "What happens now?" William looked toward the big house. From this distance, the windows looked dark and reflective, like eyes that were watching but not speaking. "Now," he said, "we tell the world the simple version of the story." "What's the simple version?" Annie asked. "The simple version," William said, "is that I created a test in my will, and you passed the test. So now you inherit my shares through a trust." until you grow up. Annie made a face. That sounds like a very boring story. William laughed softly. It is. That's why it's the version we tell lawyers and reporters. Annie nodded seriously. And the real story? William looked at the book in her hands. The real story is in that book, he said, and the real story is just for us. Annie seemed satisfied with that answer. She slid off the low stone edge, where she had been sitting, and held the book out to him. You should keep it, she said. William shook his head. No, he said. I wrote it for you. It belongs to you. Annie hugged the book to her chest again. Then you have to help me read the parts that are hard, she said. I will, he said. At that same time, inside the house, the first real battle was beginning. The emergency board call had started in the conference room. A large screen at the end of the table showed faces joining one by one: New York, Chicago, San Francisco, London, men and women in offices, in suits, in different time zones, all looking serious. Mr. Reynolds sat at the table with several documents in front of him. Victoria sat to his right, perfectly composed again, her expression calm, controlled, unreadable. Daniel sat beside her, his phone face down on the table, his jaw tight. This meeting is now in session, said one of the board members through the screen. We were informed late last night that there has been a change regarding Mr. Carter's controlling shares. We need clarification immediately. Mr. Reynolds nodded. Yesterday, the inheritance condition outlined in Mr. Carter's will was fulfilled, he said. As a result, Mr. Carter's controlling shares have been transferred into a trust, as specified in the estate documents. Transferred to who? Another voice asked. Mr. Reynolds did not hesitate. To Annie Carter, he said. There was a pause on the screen. Then several people spoke at once. I'm sorry, who? Annie Carter? I wasn't aware Mr. Carter had a daughter. Victoria spoke then, her voice calm and professional, the voice she used at charity galas and investor dinners. This information was private, she said. But yes, Annie is Mr. Carter's daughter. Daniel did not look at her when she said it, but he did not contradict her either. One of the older board members leaned closer to his camera. And this child now controls the majority voting shares through a trust? He asked. Yes, Mr. Reynolds said. The trust will be managed by a fiduciary team and overseen legally. Day-to-day operations of the company will remain unchanged. Another board member spoke. Carter, with all due respect, the market is not going to react calmly to the news that control of Carter Industries has been placed in the hands of a minor. William's voice came from the doorway. Then it's a good thing the market doesn't get a vote in my will. Everyone in the room turned as William walked in and took his seat at the head of the table. I built this company, he said calmly. I took it public. I bought it back. I expanded it. I carried it through 2 recessions. And I structured my estate the way I structured it for one reason, to make sure control stayed with someone I trust. And you trust a child? One of the board members asked. William did not raise his voice. I trust my daughter, he said. The room was quiet again. Victoria sat very still beside him. Daniel stared at the table. One of the board members finally said, Then I suppose the real question is not who owns the shares. The real question is who will influence how those shares are voted. William folded his hands on the table. That, he said, is exactly the right question. He looked around the room, at the faces on the screen, at the people who had worked with him for years. And the answer, he said, is that the person who taught Annie to read the truth is the person I trust to help her decide. Victoria turned her head slowly. And who would that be? She asked quietly. William met her eyes. Her mother, he said. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood that the real transfer of power had never been about a book, or even about a child. It had always been about the woman who taught the child how to read the truth. The boardroom remained quiet for several seconds after William said the final sentence. The person I trust to help her decide is her mother. The words did not sound loud, but they changed the shape of the room. On the large screen, several board members exchanged looks. Around the table, no one spoke immediately, because everyone understood that this was no longer only about inheritance. It was about power, influence, and who would stand next to that power. Victoria was the first to speak, and when she did, her voice was calm, controlled, almost gentle. You're saying, she said slowly, that Claire, the head housekeeper, will influence how the controlling shares of Carter Industries are voted. William did not look away. I'm saying Claire is Annie's mother, he replied, and Annie is the owner of those shares. Daniel let out a short breath through his nose. This is unbelievable, he said. Investors are going to love this. The company is now effectively controlled by a 6-year-old and a housekeeper. William's tone did not change. The company is controlled by a trust, a legal team, and a board of directors. The same as many family-controlled companies in this country. The only difference is that now you all know who the future owner is. One of the board members on the screen leaned forward. William, we are not questioning your legal right to structure your estate. But perception matters. Stability matters. The market values predictability. William nodded slightly. I agree, he said. That's why nothing in the daily operation of this company will change. The CEO remains the CEO. The board remains the board. The only thing that changed is who the company ultimately belongs to. And Claire? Another board member asked. What exactly is her role in this? William thought for a moment before answering. Her role, he said, is the same role she has had for 6 years. She is Annie's mother. She will advise her daughter. She will protect her daughter. And she will remind everyone in this room that this company is not just numbers on a screen, it's people. Victoria gave a small, almost sad smile. You trust her that much? She asked. William answered without hesitation. Yes, Victoria.